Well, I've called them both, so I think they'll join us. I know how busy it is at the Capitol, and it's easy to lose track of time and run people out. So I am sure they will be on the call in a second. And anyway, but we could talk about a few other things. I know that it is a busy time at the Capitol. They've had a lot of activity going on. Uh, Wednesdays are always committee days, so they're always busy there.
He's trying to cover for it.
There he is. Hey guys, I just can you?
There we go. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, how you doing? Good morning, speaker. How you doing? Or afternoon?
We're good. How are y'all?
Good, good, good. So we've got our leaders on the call and statewide, all across the state. What I was going to do is just kind of basically introduce you guys real quick, and then just turn it over and let you talk. I know Chairman Hastings likes to talk about a lot of education stuff, but that's free. Anytime you want. We've done this in the past with other legislators. We let them come in and maybe explain a bill or something, and it's a pretty good tool. They talk directly to our teachers, and they have opportunity to give you feedback. So with that, I mean, I'll do that. I give you both. I know that Chairman Sexton. I'll give you a little nice introduction, but you're in your sixth term. You're the 83rd Speaker of the House. You represent Cumberland, Van Buren, and a piece of Putnam County. And so we appreciate that. And then, you're from the University of Tennessee. You're from Anderson County, where your family were educators. They were public school educators. So you come from there. Did I say anything incorrect there?
No, you're good. You're good. No, yeah. So I think my parents were educators. My grandparents were educators. And so long line of family members who are teaching. And I still have cousins and so forth that are educators as well.
And then we've got Chairman Hastings there and another family. And by the way, Chairman Hastings 6'9", so he gets. We all look up to him, and he as well comes from a long line of educators. I could get the whole introduction and everything, but a few years ago we worked really together on a bill for student discipline and for helping us with the discipline, which is still, by the way, the number one issue that a lot of people mention to us is student behavior. And so we think that's a good bill, and still it's not being implemented correctly. But he and Chairman Sapicki were real great with that. He really strengthened that a lot with his expertise. But he's a third generation educator. He's traveled the world, and he played for one of my favorite coaches, Bobby Knight. So anyway, so maybe they'll share some insight with that. But in general, what we want to talk about in our transition, is education in general. The Governor Lee's Education Freedom Scholarship Act. Although we oppose vouchers, and we've talked about this, Speaker and I've talked about this, we like the House version of the bill better than any of the versions. We really appreciate the work that he's done. Ed Chairs has sat down with us. We were able to meet with them and share some of our concerns and frustrations in public schools, and it showed up in the bill. And so we were very grateful for them to take the time and put a lot of that stuff that you see in there came out of that meeting that we had. And so, so I wanted them to share with you today anything on education legislation and the latest on school vouchers. And with that, I'm going to ask everybody, be polite. Our crew's very calm, collected. We're professional. The name in front of it means a lot. We're professional educators. And so I'm going to ask everybody to be on mute. I know Kaylee can mute that. But if you do have a question, I ask you to ask the question. But with that, Speaker Sexton, Chairman Hastings, the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity. I'll do a slight recap over the last 13 years since I've been here, starting with Governor Haslam's administration. And I remember back in the day when the professional educators of Tennessee weren't part of the option for teachers in the state. And so we worked hard, and a lot of people worked hard to have you as another voice and different than TEA. So we appreciate, what has happened in the past to allow teachers to have another voice for them other than just one. And so we appreciate the job that you do. I will say under the last 13 years, the state has invested $3.6 billion new dollars of state money into K through 12 education. we've seen a lot of benefits and a lot of gains over that. I think one of the things that we're going to continue to do is to invest. We're committed to trying to increase teacher salaries and do a lot of other things as well in the classroom, knowing that money can only take us so far. And so there's other things that we think we can do to help teachers in the classroom. And we'll talk about that through the choice bill, because it's not just about choice, as you said, it's about other things. But our investment in public schools is there. Whether we pass choice or not, or if we do, over 90% of the students are still going to be in public education. So it remains really important to us to continue to fund it and do it. And what we really are wanting to do in education is create a level playing field between public schools and private schools to where we can compete. And a lot of people want us to pull private schools back to public. What I would rather do is have public schools be more like a private, have more autonomy and more flexibility, and get back to the days of when I was in school, where teachers teach and you give the test that you need to. But you're trying to develop people into future leaders, into future scholars, and give them the tools to be successful. And I think Race to the Top kind of pulled us back from that, and it did some good things, I guess, but I think it put us into a place where we're testing more, thinking that we're going to get better. And I think we're kind of at a plateau right now. And so the state of education, we're doing well. I will say this. When I go everywhere to speak, our third grade, we passed third grade reading retention and math retention a couple of years ago. But let me just tell you, it's not that we've had bad teachers, because the data shows for the last 50 years that our scores have not been great, right? And so we've been 37% to 44%, depending on what you want to look at, depending on if you make the standards a little bit more rigorous than the other. But we've always been right there. And so it is statistically impossible that we've had 50 years or 5 decades of bad teachers. So it's telling us that it's not a teacher problem. We don't have a teacher problem. We think we're putting more things into the classroom that's limiting the teacher's capability of teaching. And that's one of the things we're trying to get to. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kirk.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I'm a third generation public educator. I'm in my 17th year at the Perry County School System, teaching, coaching, and being a health coordinator. And one of my big pushes, and one of the big things that I've just heard from so many teachers over the years is that we do too much just teaching to the test. And some testing is good. Of course, we need to have some testing. We got to have some accountability, but it doesn't need to be for the sake of instruction time. And I know for all you teachers out there, you've probably heard about there's a lot of toolkits that get emailed out from the Department of Education, toolkits on how to handle summer school, toolkits on other programs. And one of the things that, one of the top tools that we can send back to our districts is time. And with instruction time, you're going to see, I think, an increase in scores. You're going to see an increase in buy-in from our teachers. And we need to focus as much on preparing our students for their first career, more so than just the next test. And so that's been one of my main focuses since I've been up here.
Very good. Where do you want to start on next? You want to just go into if you want to talk about the educational freedom bill, right? And so I'll talk about the scholarship portion, and I'll let Kirk kind of dive into the K through 12 portion of the House amendment, just so we know where we are. On the choice aspect, the governor, we've modified the governor's choice bill a little bit because we've heard from individuals. And so we put some income limits in at 400%, 500%, and then there's no income limit based on the number of people that apply. So it does go to, if this pot doesn't fill up, it goes to the next, which is 500%, and go forth until you get to 20,000 scholarships used. The only way to expand the program in the House version is to have 90% usage of that allotment of scholarships. So in year one, if you have 20,000 and you have, 10%, if you use 18,000 scholarships, then the next year it would increase by 20%. But if you don't have that amount, it does not expand. The next year you keep it under that 20,000. And so we have a growth mechanism where we don't go too fast, And so we can watch and then we can get results. We also require on the House version that they have to take the state assessment or a nationally recognized assessment for those kids who are using the scholarship. Not all kids in private school, obviously, but if you're using a scholarship and you're going to a private school, you have to take one of those assessments. A lot of private schools are probably already doing some form of national assessment, whether it's a Stanford or Iowa or something. And so that information for that student will get reported back to the state through a third party where we can monitor the progress. In our version 2, we also are trying to stop pop-up schools, because one of the things that we heard is, well, you guys can have somebody who opens up a school after this bill passes and they're going to take people and it's not going to do any good because they don't have a history. What we say is, if you're a private school, you have to be in existence for 3 years, unless you're a Category 1, which means that you're approved by the Department of Education and you operate as closely to a public school as humanly possible for a private school. So if you want to take on that part and be more like a public school, then we say that you can operate, because it kind of puts you under the same things as a public school. So that's the one exception on the 3-year rule. On the other aspects, what we say, it's $7,075 on the scholarship. It can be used for certain things. We have put in safeguards, making it a Class A misdemeanor for fraud and other things, or misusage, making sure that we don't have rampant fraud that's going on, whether it's the operator of the system or whether it's parents of that. And the last thing that we did is we removed homeschoolers out from the House version. It's still in the Senate. And so it does not apply to homeschoolers anymore, because there was a fear that they would just simply leave and go to a homeschool and they would never teach their child and they would just take the money. And so we exempted out homeschoolers, so they're no longer part of the House version on the choice side. And with that, I'll let Kirk kind of talk about the K through 12 side.
Yeah, and I'll say also just a quick, a little bit of a 1,000-foot view before I dive in a little bit deeper, is that I had one organization that represents public schools. It wasn't y'all, but there was another group that said, hey, like 100% of our members love 80% of the House bill, and so if you play that out, then you have 80% of the bill, House Bill 1183, our Education Freedom Act. 80% of the bill is a positive for public schools, and 65% of the funding is for public schools. And if you look on the other side of that, then the 20% that maybe some won't agree with, or the school choice, if that's the 20% you're concerned about, then think of it like this: that's going to affect 2% of the students. All right, 20,000 students, that's 2%, and 35% of the budget in the bill. On the other side, that other 80% that is good for public schools, and that 65% of funding that's in that bill is for the other 880,000 students in Tennessee. Now, drilling down just a little bit, one of the things that we talked about was adding instruction time. And one of the things that the House version does is we eliminate a lot of the standardized testing that is not federally required. We give around 29 standardized tests in Tennessee that are mandated. We only really have to do around 14 that are federally required. And so by getting rid of some of that underbrush, cutting some of that out, and allowing our teachers to focus on the tests that we need to have, the math every year, the English every year, the ACT in high school. By doing that, I really do believe that, and this is the belief of a lot of teachers, I think, across the state that have reached out, that by adding that instruction time and decreasing the amount of testing, it's going to increase our chances of being better at the areas that we're still being held accountable for, those tests that we have to have. We ran the numbers and talked. This came from a lot of teachers, TCAP teachers, EOC teachers, counselors, principals, and it came to about 300 instruction hours that we can add back to the classrooms if we reduce our testing. It's 20 of those hours are just getting rid of 20 hours of standardized testing, but it also the hidden value in that is the benchmarks, the benchmark tests, the practice tests, and all the things that go into preparing students for each TCAP and each EOC. There's a lot of hidden value there in being able to add that instruction time. And with that, if there's anybody that has any questions or anything else that we haven't covered, I guess we would be glad to answer any.
Yeah, we also have in there about RTI and the intensive tutoring that you can count towards that requirement, which we think will help dramatically.
Agreed.
Also, teacher
Where's the
evaluation.
spring?
On ours, we have level 5s only get evaluated every 3s and 4s every 2. We're trying to make it where the 1s and 2s is where the bulk of the time is spent. And the teachers who are performing well, they shouldn't be treated the same as 1s and 2s. So we're trying to create some separation there. But our focus on the K through 12 is really trying to increase the amount of instruction time in the classroom, reduce the testing, and try to do some things that we have heard from teachers about having things count different ways. Chronic absentee is one issue that we're trying to work on in the bill as well, which may impact you, may not impact you, but we're trying to do a workaround on that.
And also the insurance difference. We've for years been trying to get the state insurance. Right now it's 45-55 for teachers on the state insurance match. This bill that we have ups that to 60% on the state share, and so that's a significant savings of 15% that goes directly to teachers in a lot of respects that are in areas that are strictly 45-55 split on their insurance. And for the school systems that do have a local match in there, then that's a 15% savings that is freeing up money that will stay in education. And so we ran the numbers on some of that. On the ones that are getting that 15% straight to the teachers, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000 to $2,000. That's going to be a direct savings to our teachers by going up to that 15% on the state share side of insurance. So I just want to make sure we threw that in there too.
Yeah. But we'll be happy to take any questions.
Mute off.
Speaker, this is Freddie Curtis, former director of Cannon County Schools. I appreciate your efforts. And let me ask you this, on the rural
Oh, they
funding.
got lights up here around us now.
The bill that Mike Hale has got, is that bill for additional rural schools, would that go up to 4% more under TISA? Is that bill progressing, or is that going to be part of the budget?
Well, part of our bill is what we try to do is instead of just throwing money in the base, we try to be more strategic. So in the House version, what we did with the governor's investment, we currently small school districts are defined as less than 1,000 students. And so they get a 5% weight. So we're increasing that 5% to an 8% weight, which is a 60% increase. Then we came in for small districts and added a new category of 1,001 students to 1,700 students and given them an additional 2% that they didn't have before. They just automatically moved off small, try of a transition off as you're growing to that degree. And then on sparse districts, right now which is a rural district, but the formula calls it sparse. It's a 5% weight on that. And so we moved that weight to 6%, which is a 20% increase on the sparseness of it. So we try to do small, we try to do sparse. And then the other thing, if you're interested, as far as the infrastructure, one of the things that TISA never provided was for maintenance or infrastructure across the state. And so what we've tried to do is put in a $75 per student amount that's direct funding, which means the locals don't have to match it for every school district. So depending on how many students you have, you get $75 a person, which means that you could bond out off that money, which in some areas could be a lot. But it is a direct funding to the district that would be a recurring basis.
Yeah, that'll help tremendously, and the insurance too. If we could get that additional 15% off of the locals in rural areas, that would be a great help, Cameron. So thank you all so much. I appreciate both you and Kirk working so very hard for the rural districts.
Thank you for that. And one of the reasons that it's really a big deal for the rural areas to get that 15% is because I know in my area we have a lot of teachers that get poached and get recruited to come to areas, and they're enticed by that difference in benefits. And so we're trying to close that gap so that we can retain and recruit teachers better in our rural areas.
Our goal is to get it.
I've battled that intently in Cannon because teachers go to Rutherford of the difference in pay. And that's been a big, draw for Rutherford from those rural teachers from Cannon County. And so that I really do appreciate. And I know the current director will too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Carolyn Marino. I'm in the middle of a campground, so I'm just wondering if you can hear me.
We got you.
We got you.
Okay. I'm wondering if you could explain to me, are IPGs directly correlated with federal funding? It seems like when you looked up IPG last year, I'm in Williamson County, it was just a Williamson County thing, but now if you look it up, the guidelines for it come from New York City and other places. So obviously it's a national program, but I haven't quite put my finger on exactly how the funding and IPGs are, because IPGs are what are suffocating teachers right now, and they're ending up with 3 to 11 central office people, other teachers in their classroom once a month observing them. So even though it's not officially an observation, they are feeling the pressure in the elementary schools of all these IPGs and reading and math right now, and seeing if that's necessary because of funding.
That's a great question. And I will say, and I know that this is going to be a little bit off from what you're talking about, but we do have some good protections in the bill on teachers that have high evaluations, not having to have evaluations as frequently. One, to free up administrators to also be able to focus on the teachers that are needing it most. But I will say this: I think I know the person that we need to talk to at the department that can get us a better concrete answer on that specific question that you're asking. So I will make sure if JC or if you can look up, if you can just email my office or get my number from him and reach out to my office. I want to double back with you on that and get you a little bit better detailed answered. But you bring up a great point that we've heard that from some other teachers across the state. It wasn't really put as well as you just put it, but that would be something that I'd like to get back to you on.
Thank you. I just know that we're trying to recruit teachers, and it's making teachers that are good want to retire sooner or quit or change professions. I literally have a couple of friends I know that are leaving the profession because they're tired of all these IPGs, and they're 4s and 5s on their scores. So they're just tired of being observed.
Yeah, and the thing is, as we move forward, I mean, with the caption of the bill that we have is open to education as a whole. So it's relative to education. And so as we try to fix the evaluation and the 20-minute pop-ins and other things like that, we appreciate you bringing this up, because then we can research it and we still have time if there's something that we can do in this legislation to mirror the evaluation process on that as well. But I think we just need some more detailed information to have those conversations.
Okay. Last thing I'll say is just if you talk to anyone at a higher level, they'll tell you they are not being observed for IPGs, but they are technically not an observation, but they technically come in with a score sheet and leave you notes for being observed, which is not officially an observation.
It sounds like one.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yes, I had a question regarding the requirement for the assessment of voucher students. You talked about the norm reference test, Iowa, ERB, Stanford 9/10, and I don't know if you're aware, but all of those are Common Core aligned tests. So, and I know that we passed legislation basically saying no Common Core. How do you negotiate that, or how do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, what we have said is a nationally recognized test, or they can do the TCAP. Some of the private schools are already using a nationally recognized assessment, but it's their option in our bill to use whichever one that they want to.
And I will say this, and I've got my education committee is starting in about 3 minutes, but I did want to just say that one of the key points that we get brought up a lot, and it's a good point, when they say, hey, this is public funds, it shouldn't go to private schools. And it's a fair point. I'm not here to say that that's an incorrect point. But I think one thing that you have to also consider that's a pretty fair point is that it's private citizen tax money being decided by a private citizen how to educate their child. And I'm not saying one is outweighs the other. I just think it's important to see that side of it as well when we're discussing this. and I appreciate y'all having me on. The speaker scheduled my committee to start at 4:30, so he can't be too upset about me having to leave.
I'll stick around for a little bit.
But I appreciate y'all and hope to chat again soon.
Yeah, I'll stay for a little bit, Stacy.
Yes, this is Jeff Luttrell, Director of Wills County Schools. And of course, when the House amendments hit, it's obvious there's a lot in there that we welcome in public schools. We've been asking for. So my question is, why does the changes that are good for public schools have to be tied to a choice bill? Why couldn't they stand alone and push those through General Assembly when you have a supermajority?
Well, I think from our standpoint is even when some of these things in the bill that we have been tried to be passed for years and you couldn't. I mean, like trying to reduce the mandated testing requirement has been tried. They can't get it. ACT work keys that Representative Haston has tried to work on for years, the department has denied and the administration's put back on. And so there's a lot of things in these bills that are benefit K through 12 that have been worked on in the past that has never been able to make it out. And so in the House, what we decided to do is, as we're talking about freedom of choice for parents to make the decision that's best for their child, whether you agree with that or not through a school choice scholarship or voucher, or whatever you want to call it, we thought it was important, as we're trying to say they should have freedom, then we're trying to provide freedom in the classroom. And we think that they go hand in hand. And so some of these things have been tried and they haven't been successful to get passed. And so we think that combining these two for those individuals and for other people, whether it's in administration or department, we're more likely to achieve success in reforming the things in K through 12 that we need, using the same vehicle as choice, because in other aspects we haven't ever had it to get to be able to be passed before.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, Freddie Curtis again, Cannon County. What about the expiration on when retired teachers that are currently teaching now under that 2-year provision? Is that going to be, is there anything in the works? Because that'll expire at the end of next year, and some school systems are really depending upon those retired educators to help bridge the gap for right now. Just wonder if that was going to be extended. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's anything in this bill that does that. I mean, that would be a question for Haston. I depend on my education chairs, whether it's Representative Sapicki, Haston, White, Moody, to talk to me. I can ask them about it. I just don't know if that's there. JC might have a better answer to that, but I don't know.
And Mr. Speaker, one of the things we did, it's on my fault, but Secretary Lillard wanted me to come meet with him. He was in agreement with, we tried to push that last year to expand that out a little bit. He wants to limit it to who gets to continue on. So maybe that is a conversation we need to have.
Yeah.
And I mean, he doesn't want to see a glut of people coming back, but on the other hand, I think you need it. So certainly I think it's something we need to definitely kick the tires on early in the next session.
Yeah, be happy to. I know, from his standpoint too, I will say as far as the teachers who are retired, us funding the pension plan to the degree that we fund it, where it's close to 100% in some instances or over 100%, will continue to benefit those who do retire, that the money is there, unlike in some other states. But if there's some things that we need to work on, I'm not opposed to it. We just need to work through the hoops. I'll be happy to sit down with y'all when you sit down with Treasurer Lillard to talk through it. That'd be fine.
Speaker Sexton, this is Larry Creasy at Siegel High School in Rutherford County, and I got a question concerning TISA as well. What can be done in districts adding students to ensure that local taxes aren't funding all the growth during the school year?
Yeah, just run me through a little bit more of what you're talking about on that, if you don't mind, a little bit more detail.
Like with the growth that we're having in Rutherford County when new students are coming in during the school year, will there be additional funds being able to send to the district?
Oh, I got you. Well, I think part of TISA, there's an excessive growth portion. Is my understanding. I don't think it meets to the level that you all are needing in Rutherford. And so from that standpoint, I mean, I think that we need to put in some more growth parameters for rapid growth. There's a difference, especially in the county where you increase by 5% compared to 25%. I mean, that's a lot of infrastructure. So we've heard a lot from the county, not so much from your schools in Rutherford, about water, sewer, police protection, roads, and then also having to build new schools. And so we're happy to talk about adding more growth dollars for high growth areas as far as population goes. There's a little bit in there right now. I don't think it's enough to cover it. I think also one of the things that we try to do with the infrastructure money that we're trying to put in TISA through this bill would help Rutherford in the aspect of right now in TISA, there's no money for you to maintain buildings other than what you can squeeze out of the formula. And when you squeeze out the formula, what that means is you're taking money from somewhere else, maybe the classroom or somewhere else. And so it's kind of detrimental to that part. So the $75 is a good start for us to start funding infrastructure, which doesn't solve the problem in Rutherford County, but as a recurring basis, it does help at least planning a little bit better. But to the answer for growth, I mean, I think we need to look at TISA and look at how we're funding excessive growth, and there needs to be higher rates on that, in my opinion.
Any other questions for the speaker? Speaker, you may have answered them all.
I don't know about that, but
I do have one question. This is Carolyn Marino again. I've had people ask me why the percentage, the dollar amount going towards private school is higher from the state than going to the public schools. Is that accurate?
with the investment we're making in TISA this year, that should be about what the state match is, or what the base amount should be. The base amount should come out to $7,075. On the TISA formula, kind of like the BEP, which I don't completely agree with the ability to pay, that money is more than some counties get from the state. So depending on where you are in the state and the ability to pay formula, like for example, Sevier County and Williamson County pay more locally than they get from the state. Whereas if you go to Representative Haston's area, like Perry County, they get more money from the state than they pay from the local. So there is a conversation going on about that instances. So in some counties that may be higher based on the ability to pay model that's embedded in TISA, but that amount is basically what the state funds on average across the state.
Okay, so then if you are in Williamson County and a private school costs somewhere between $12,000 and $28,000, and another county that private school is somewhere between $1,500 and $10,000, it doesn't. I'm not quite sure the math. I understand you're using a formula.
Oh, you're talking about on that end? Yeah, I was talking about more of the 7,000 lining up with the TISA formula. You're talking about private tuition costs in the 7,000.
Well, no, I'm saying that if you are giving more in a county that gets more money from the state, in essence, typically, I've taught in a private school before. Typically, the further out you get from a metro area, the private schools tend to be a little less. They don't end up being $28,000 a year. So it seems like the parents, like in Williamson County, you're saying would get the same amount as a parent in Perry County, but in Perry County, it might cover the cost of the entire private education. In Williamson, it would cover a small percentage.
Well, I think there's a lot of, the average private school tuition, I think, is somewhere between $10,400 and $10,800 all across the state. That's the average. And you do have some in Davidson County that are $28,000, but you also have some through different churches or Christian groups or the Catholic Church that may be more aligned to $7,000. What I do know about private schools is all private schools, they do have foundations and they do provide scholarships for people who want to attend. And so there's, for an example, if a school currently is spending $10,000 and their foundation can fund 20 students, then they give 20 students a scholarship and they pay the full amount for them. In this instance, one of the scenarios could be that now that that student's getting $7,000, they can double the amount of people they take, because now they can give scholarships to more people because they're not having to give the full amount. So you do have the capability of potentially of that private school giving additional scholarship for those students to attend. So you do get more people to attend. The other aspect is there's some parents who can afford $4,000 or $5,000 a year, but they can't afford the $10,000 to $11,000 a year. So the $7,000 does give them the opportunity to have success. What I will say is, as far as the scholarship, it's $7,000. But if you're an ESA program, which is outside of this, it's different. Then in Shelby and Davidson and Hamilton, it's a whole lot more than $7,000. It's more of what the local and what the state match is, and it could be anywhere from $10,000 to $14,000, depending on what it could be. And so you have to remember there's two different programs about where that money would come from. And most people, if you're eligible for the ESA, you're going to take the ESA. You're not going to take the scholarship because the scholarship is less money than the ESA is in those areas. But I think we've had conversations, and look, I would sit here and say, if someone wants to say, well, I could be for this if we put $10,000 in instead of $7,000, we can have that conversation. No one's making the argument that I'm for it if we put in 10 or 11 or whatever amount. It's more of they throw it out, but they're still against it. And we're willing to have the conversations if we want to increase that amount. But right now we're at 7,000, and we think that that's a doable number that allows more kids to attend private schools. But remembering, in most rural areas, there's not a lot of private schools anyway, and they're mostly in the urban and suburban areas.
So I would not be an advocate of increasing that amount. I just think that JC has mentioned to me, we've talked about this a while back, there are some areas where you can show the success rates of the exact program possibly are very similar to this. I would suggest getting those out there in front of the public, because right now this just seems like such a mystery with all these different formulas in different regions and areas that people are very upset about this. I don't see a lot of support behind this. And as a Christian conservative myself, this happened to be, it doesn't, my classroom, I'm benign that way, but it just seems like there's so much area that the dollars amounts are so confusing that the public is going to have a hard time getting behind this.
Well, the scholarship doesn't convolute that. The scholarship is a set 7,000. The TISA formula and how it's created and the ability to pay was passed 3 years ago. It was the same thing under BEP at the time on ability to pay. So the ability to pay has nothing to do with this bill as far as what the locals pay and what the state pays. And if Williamson County pays more than the state, that's more of a formula problem than it is what's in this bill. This bill doesn't affect that at all.
Do you feel like right now you have support to pass this? I guess that's the question out there. A lot of people don't think there's enough support to pass it, but then you sound very confident today that it's going through.
I think we have the votes to pass it. I think on the House side, we have the votes to pass what we have put in place. But what I do know, and the conversations to be had, is when you look at other states and you look at other states that have passed school choice programs, and you look at what happened in this last election in Texas, if you just look at what happened in Texas, the governor in Texas tried to pass school choice. He missed it by a few votes. He targeted 10 House members in Texas. He beat 5 of them. He lost 2, and 3 are in a runoff, and he's leading in 2 of the 3. And so what is going to happen in the future at some point, we don't know when. We could say it's next year. You could say it's 5 years. But you can look at the history in Missouri, where they went after members who voted against choice, and you look at Texas, where they did. Over time, Tennesseans, and we polled this across the state, Tennesseans in general are in favor of a school choice program. Whether or not they use it or not is not what they want. They just want the opportunity if they need to. And so it runs, in my district, school choice runs 65%. People support it 65% to 28%. Against, the others are undecided. So the public is there. So the question becomes, at some point, there will be people going after members to defeat them, and either in 5 years, there might be nothing there that we're trying to get in K through 12. It'd just be a pure choice because they have the votes for pure choice. And you're left with the same testing, the same thing, and all that other stuff that we try to get past and we can't get past. And so after COVID, prior to 2020, I don't think the people were as favorable to choice as they are after COVID. I think that's where the shift has changed.
I have a question. This is Angie Markham. I'm a charter school operator in Hamilton County. And so in Hamilton County right now, our per pupil funding average is about $11,900. So let's say that next year, some of those students participate in the Educational Freedom Act and they use their $7,000 somewhere. How does that pan out to getting the money that was like earmarked for those students? How does it help the other students, the part that's left in the big pot of money? How does that actually translate to helping students who are left in the district?
So I think when you look at Hamilton County, you have to remember that Hamilton County last year was voted in to become part of the ESA program, which is where the money that is local and state, if you're in a failing school or if you qualify for the ESA, you have access to that pot of money, and that money directly follows that child to whatever school they go to. And so that's the ESA program. The scholarship program is first you have to move all those students off. And so, in my opinion, the ESA would be more harmful because that money follows the student. It doesn't at least stay. And so if someone else comes and takes that seat, you have to figure out that money because the local money and the state money under the ESA follows that student. Under the scholarship, it's a funding outside TISA. So if a student leaves, it's just like it is in private school right now. If you have a student in Hamilton County who leaves public school and the parent pays for it, you lose that money potentially because that person's not in the seat. And so what the scholarship does that we're proposing, the Educational Freedom Scholarship, mirrors what currently is the practice going from public to private if the parent's paying for it. It doesn't do what the ESA does.
All right. Let me say this to you, Speaker. What I will tell you is you're exactly right about school choice polling very highly, but it depends on how you define it. So when you go to that area, if you were to ask, do you want vouchers to go to kids already existing in private school, those numbers drop tremendously down. And I've looked at a lot of polling, and so I want to do want to toss that out because I think all of us believe in school choice at some level. And one of my concerns is some of the choice options that public schools have already embraced, like open enrollment and some of these other areas, actually end up getting curtailed, particularly in vocational areas, end up getting curtailed because they're going to lose money and not be able to run some of the programs. So those are some other things. So you're balancing one over the other. I think charter schools could end up getting hurt with some vouchers in some of the urban areas. So just be careful as you do that. The main question I have is, as you know, and you and I've talked about it, is I really like your version way better than the governor's version is at the very bottom of the level. I don't think the support's there for that. It steps up to the Senate level, but you guys have done the work, and I want to commend you for doing that. You actually have sat down with us numerous times. I mean, I've talked with Chairman Sapicki forever, Chairman Haston, and I have talked about getting crosstabs and EOCs and all that other good stuff. We've done a lot of work on that, so I commend you on that. But, you know, make sure when you go in there and negotiate with the Senate, you fight for your version, because that's really going to be the determining factor, I think, and how people respond.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're not going to put just a choice vote on the House floor. I think people are afraid something like that happen. We're not. We're committed to. Here's my mind. If you just put a choice bill up, it's an absolute win and an absolute loss for whoever, right? Whoever wins and whoever loses, it's absolute. Good policy, a lot of times, in my mind, absolute wins and absolute losses do not make great policy. Sometimes you have to, but great policy is when you both win, right? And both winning means that we allow parents to have the capability of making a decision. And then what we do is we give the win in the public schools, giving more freedom and autonomy, reducing testing, helping teachers with more instruction time, teacher evaluations, and doing things that we've heard in the classroom that we can never get past, and putting it in a form where we can all achieve. Because at the end, coming from two parents who taught, what they care about is teaching in the classroom. Now, they retired before a race to the top, right? My parents did. So they haven't experienced what the new school is like, basically. But what I do know is they just want to teach, and they want the capability of teaching and instructing and doing what they went to school to do. And I think Race to the Top has moved us away from that. And we're trying to get back there, and we think the way to get there is to put it in a package. And we think we can be successful if we can get the votes in the Senate to go along with it. So, all right, is that it?
Yeah. If anybody has any questions they'd like to send to us, we'll forward them on to you, and you can forward it to your team or however. But Mr. Speaker, thank you for taking your time today. I know your time is very valuable. Appreciate you doing that. I'll be up there all day tomorrow if you need me.
We'll see you. All right. Yes, sir. Thank you all for getting on. I know some of y'all might be your spring break, so thank you all for jumping on at 4 o'clock. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all.
All right, JC, anything else we need to touch on? We got some people jumping off, but.
And I so appreciate everybody taking their time for that. I think it's going to matter, but please get us questions. If you want anything asked, we will make sure they get to the chairman and to the speaker. We got his attention, and, I'm glad to hear that, because I don't think the support's there for the governor's bill, and I don't think it's much there for the Senate version. So
I know that he's very up on his bill where it's at, but I don't know anybody that supports it. I haven't, he sounded like it's like a done deal, and I'm thinking, like, who's supporting this? Because that's not what I've heard.
No, he has the votes. They're pretty astute with vote counting. If you look at it, it's probably a 55, 44, 45, somewhere in there split right now. There'll be several Republicans like Whitson in your district probably is a no. You've got, but the rest of your representatives are yes. You've got others in there, but it's going to be a tough vote. If it's going to get beat, it's going to get beat in finance. So that's a difficult place for it. So the money may not add up.
It was a little disheartening to hear, like, they're just plowing forward.
Well, his take, and I do get this. I mean, you've got 3 competing ideas, and at least he said the idea of, if we're going to have to eat this, then we're going to make it as palatable as we can. I mean, the insurance was a big deal for us to get it put in there. I mean, I turned in a list of about 20 items, and about 18 of them are in there. So not that, but then they said, well, do you support it? And I go, no. And we don't, and we're not going to come out in support of it. But that's just the thing. But I'm going to continue to work. I mean, the fraud provision, that came from me. I mean, I talked to him last week at length about it, or 2 weeks ago at length about need to have fraud. I actually would have made it a felony. But they told me they'd have to go into change another part of the code. And I'm like, all right, but I would make it a felony if they commit fraud, because I can tell you firsthand from Florida, there were people that hundreds of thousands of dollars they stole. So, and then you've had Arizona, and you've also had Ohio just recently get caught up in scandal. So anyway.
Okay.
I think that Angie would be a great resource for them to how to do it correctly, effectively, because coming from Minnesota, we had so many charter schools that were fraudulent or really poorly run that the kids were supposed to be getting a leg up, got way behind.
I mean, we had access to them. We do have access to them.
His answer did not make sense to me. Like, he didn't answer when you do figure out the calculation for your district is determined by how many you divide what the tax revenue is locally by how many students you have. So if you're dividing by a lesser number, then you're going to have more at the local level. So he didn't answer the question for me of how those dollars are going to increase for all the other students.
Well, one of the
does
things
his
that,
answer make sense to you?
So do me this favor, put in those questions you want answered, and let me submit them to all of them. That's how I'll do it, and I'll send it to him and to all the chairs. And the ones that'll answer it will be Hastings and Sapicki.
I will do it.
Any questions you all have, I'm glad to forward them.
JC, I think just observing from here, I do believe that the reason he's got the votes is because of the provisions that this organization has suggested be added to the bill. That's why he's got the votes with all those rural legislators. That's how he's got the votes, is because look at what all we're doing besides just the voucher. It's what we're doing, the ESAs. So that's the reason he's got the votes right there.
But the problem is that for them is that the Senate wants to strip them all out. And the Senate and Lumbergh is almost unwilling to move. And people can dislike John Lumbergh a lot. I happen to like him, but Lumbergh is unwilling to move, and he really thinks it should be tied to TISA rather than a standalone program. So they're pretty adamant about it. So it'll be interesting to see if they can get together or not. Both parties have told me they're willing to walk away with nothing. And I didn't want to correct him because, Speaker, they did say that about the Texas election. But let me mention this to you. They went after those Republicans, not on school choice. They went after those Republicans on the border issue. And that's where they got them. Not once. AFP did all the mailings on them in AFC, and they targeted them on a different issue. They didn't target them on vouchers. So that's another issue. I'm not concerned about it. It'll poll however the question is asked and whatever the audience is asking it. That's how those, this. If I wanted to poll 80-year-old women in my mother's peer group to find out what their favorite television show is, Gunsmoke's going to poll near the very top. So
yeah, it can be skewed, don't doubt it.
And so, but that being said, he's a very astute person, and he's willing to work with us. And it never hurts to have friends in high places.
Well, here's one more thought. My last thought is my son is working in Minnesota now in a private school that has tripled in size since COVID. It was a big school, and now it's a giant school. And it happened across the country. And I think a lot of their polling isn't on Tennessee public schools. I think it's on the national trend of parents pulling their kids and putting them into places where they have more control over the ethics being taught. But Tennessee as a whole has a lot of reasonable conservative or people who don't bring their politics into the classroom. I think it's a national trend, and that's where they're benefiting from on their asking the question. Everybody across the country is saying yes to wanting to have the option right now.
And I do think also, Carolyn, the other issue that came, and I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to get people angry, but I'm going to anger some people. The way that Memphis and Davidson County Metro Schools handled COVID really caused a lot of backlash for public schools, and I think it's a negative. So you need to be aware of that. And as we do that, I mean, just last week I get a phone. You should see the letter that a school sent that was labeled a dropout factory from Johns Hopkins University. Sent a letter to the news station telling them to quit talking bad about them. And it was really not a well done letter. Good intent, probably. Bad intent, bad letter. They should never have sent it. And now what they did was they turned a negative story into, instead of 2 days, into 10 days. It just don't, and I can't believe they didn't even run it through their district. If that had happened in Freddie Curtis's district, somebody would have lost the job. Right, Freddie?
Exactly. Well,
mean,
you gotta
yeah,
be tactful. You gotta be tactful. Some of our folks aren't as tactful as we probably need to be.
So we got to be careful doing that. But guys, thank you for everything today. I'm sorry it took so long. We'll be back to schedule next week or next time. And again, I hope everybody has a great safe spring break and happy Easter. And if you need me, don't hesitate to call or send your questions to Kaylee or to me or to anybody, and we'll start compiling questions to get answers from these guys. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, JC.
Thank you, guys. Have a great spring break.
Appreciate everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.